Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, retribution and the justice system. We get expert political and legal analysis of the Trump administration's crackdown on the president's personal enemies and political rivals. Later in the program, what surviving suicide has taught two local advocates now fighting to save lives. But first, President Trump's recent overt actions targeting political enemies is unlike anything seen from prior administrations. Here to help us make sense of it is Nick Allard, founding dean of the Jacksonville University College of Law. Dean Allard, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on this important topic.
So it has been, as we said, a really dramatic week for the justice system here in the United States. And maybe the best way to begin is to just sort of begin with a recitation of the uncontested facts of what's occurred. Basically, the president's former personal attorney, who has no prosecutorial experience, has filed criminal charges against one of her boss's top enemies, former FBI Director James Comey. She did this despite the conclusion of her predecessor that there was not enough evidence to seek an indictment. And so this process has moved ahead. What makes this unusual, that set of facts?
Well, so many things, and I haven't been able to find a single knowledgeable person who's had experience in this area who feels that this was precedented. There's never been before a prosecutorial decision overruled from the White House. So that in itself. Second, given the nature of this, and given the duties and responsibilities of lawyers, in addition to their duties, to perform well and everything else, it's just a complete breach of the rules, the constitutional rule of law, protections that are designed to protect the American people from the abuse of government power. And so in every single respect, it is managing, because it may seem to be a hyper-technical legal rule, to stand out when there are so many other things going on in the world, from a government shutdown to all sorts of other concerns about unprecedented behavior, to tariffs, to economic concerns. This is receiving the spotlight. So I think it's a good marker that is a very significant constitutional issue, which is unfortunately existential to our democracy.
For people who don't know why this might be unusual, can you sort of explain what role a prosecutor has when it comes to bringing an indictment and why this deviates from that?
Well, a prosecutor does chase bad people. That's their job. But the ultimate goal of a prosecutor is justice. It's not conviction. Although when they properly exercise their discretion, they usually get convictions. Now, in this case, you have seasoned, experienced prosecutors. And by the way, when a judge or a lawyer or a prosecutor or a public defender is performing as a lawyer, they are, even though they have political beliefs, they have bosses, they have clients, they need to be vigorous advocates. Their duty and obligation is to law and the justice and to the professional responsibilities. So there has to be a case there. And if they don't believe that there is a case to bring, that it is unjust, they are obliged not to pursue it. And that's what happened in the opinion of people and other folks who examined the actual facts of this case. And I'll just add, Ann, that sure, clients and lawyers, prosecutors are lawyers, they have an obligation to their client and to their ultimate client, which is the American people, but they also, like Hebrew National hot dogs, have to answer to a higher authority. And by the way, I give a shout out to, Happy New Year and Good Yontif to your Jewish listeners. I know this is a very important week. But they're not unbridled in what their responsibilities are. And so they are not supposed to be operating for political reasons. They're supposed to be operating as officers of the court and constitutional responsible people.
So this prosecutor that was recently appointed, as we mentioned, former personal attorney for the president, Lindsay Halligan, we mentioned that she doesn't have any experience as a prosecutor. In fact, it was reported that she went into the wrong courtroom initially and then kind of stood on the wrong side of the judge. She doesn't have really any courtroom experience that would help her in this case. Um, and she personally presented this case to the grand jury, which is pretty unusual for a U.S. attorney. The New York Times even reported that she has not been fully briefed on the case, just given the timeline. So, what was the rush to bring this indictment at this point right now?
Well, today, September 30th, is the 5th anniversary of the hearing, the Senate Judiciary hearing, where James Comey gave the testimony in question, which is the basis for the allegations against him. So the statute of limitation runs today. So there was a big rush when the established career leader of the Eastern District Office of the United States Attorneys determined not to bring it. The president, and we don't have to doubt what the motivations are, we can go by what he said, was very concerned and wanted to, as a matter of retribution, and because he disliked strongly Mr. Comey, he wanted the case to be brought before the statute of limitations. So he forced out, or the existing U.S. attorney resigned, and he
That's
immediately
Eric Siebert, who
Eric Siebert, and then he was immediately replaced by Mr. Trump's staffer, who had never tried a case before, who was a personal lawyer and who represented him personally in the past.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to attorney and founding dean of the Jacksonville University Law School, Nick Allard. If you have questions or comments, you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. Nick, this is clearly happening over the objections of not just the former U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert, but also many staff attorneys who also believed there wasn't sufficient evidence to bring an indictment in this case at the Department of Justice. Is there some role that the Supreme Court's previous decision on presidential granting kind of broad powers to the president in terms of immunity, does that play any role in the president's willingness to take such a to have such a heavy hand in ordering the Department of Justice to bring an indictment in this case, as he has done on social media?
Well, Donald Trump is testing the edges across the board, and is crossing a lot of lines and abandoning a lot of norms to test the full power that he has. And he would be immune, I guess, for at least while he's serving, for actions that he's taken now. But this really is a brazen test of the limits of the ability to use the power of the government, to use the courts and the judicial system to punish and go after your political foes. And the reason it's so concerning is, by their own indication, the White House advisors and senior people and the president are indicating that there are others that are soon to follow. So this is a real Rubicon that has been passed, and it'll be addressed. But it's one that's very difficult, but not because of the immunity of the president. It's very difficult because, understandably, a prosecutor has great discretion and is entrusted to make good decisions, and they're given wide latitude. Now, once you have an indictment from a grand jury, which was obtained in this case, it would be ordinarily very, very difficult to challenge that prosecutorial discretion as an abuse of that discretion. But in this case, the dots line up, and the very frequent statements before and after about the purpose for bringing this case, and the fact that others reviewed and declined until somebody was found that would be willing to execute the order and bring the indictment, actually undermine the chances for success of an already weak case. And the people who have analyzed the underlying facts, they actually contradict the responsibility that is alleged for Mr. Comey for making a false statement before a congressional hearing.
I want to talk a little bit about how this could impact the case going forward and weaken it, as you say. But I just want to say, people who support Donald Trump have said that this is just an example of James Comey being held responsible. He's not necessarily beloved by either side of the political spectrum, but he has long been a target of this president for, trespasses dating back to a refusal to given a loyalty oath, and then also his um, shepherding through some of the investigation, the Mueller investigation into possible Russian interference in the election, the first election of Donald Trump. And so this relationship goes back a long ways, but people who are supporters of the president and critical of James Comey say this is legitimate. He lied. He, obfuscated. He was orchestrated leaks, and this is justified. And I guess I just want to ask you, if we were to assume that it is justified, that this uh, um, pursuit of James Comey is justified, are there problems with the way that this went down anyway?
Yes, but there's two particular issues to unpack. First was whether the case was justified and is supported by sufficient facts that it means they're likely to get a conviction. I'll put that to one side, but I can answer that pretty quickly, I think. But the other is the way this came down, is that appropriate? And the laws and the protections are not just for people you like. They're not just for popular people. They are intentionally to assure that everybody, even people who have engaged in blatant wrongs or heinous acts, get the fair shake of the law. And we're only willing to exercise punishment if the processes that should be adhered to are fairly adhered to. So this is a breach of that. And Mr. Comey is, you can also understand he's not popular among a broad spectrum of people on the different political sides. But the founders, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, and the people that wrote the Constitution understood that people are not angels, and that angels will not govern. It will be people who govern. And because it's people, you need these protections. And that's why there was a separation of powers. That's why all these other things were baked in, the importance of independent judges. And that's why all the rights of individuals in the Bill of Rights to speak out, not be censored, to have different political views, and not be punished by the government. All these rights are to protect people, not so much from each other, but from abuse of government power. So that's what's wrong. Now, with respect to whether there's a case there, objective experts, but including the prosecutors whose job and who are inclined to prosecute, they looked at the facts. And not only were the facts irrelevant to the hearing, which was the Judiciary Committee examining the Russian investigation, which bothers Mr. Trump, but the facts, the leak that was the subject of this, related to the Hillary Clinton investigation that Comey also ran. And also, not only was that make the fact irrelevant to the proceeding, so it wasn't, something that you can say affected or obstructed the proceeding, arguably, but in addition, the two people that might have testified about the leak said that they informed Mr. Comey after the fact that the leak occurred. So, and there's many other reasons. So the judgment is that you're very unlikely that you're going to get. So the third question that you might ask is, well, if there's no case there, and the people at the White House are highly intelligent people and analysts, and they must know the chances are remote at best, why bring the case? And the answer is that just bringing a case has the effect of imposing the cost and opprobrium, and it has a cost. And so it's punishment in itself to have to go through that process, and it also intimidates others. And now there's an explicit statement that they intend and expect there to be others very soon. McCabe, who is also a successor to Mr. Comey, George Soros is under investigation.
Adam Schiff, Letitia James.
And then there's investigations ongoing into the mortgage practices of several former government officials. And so this is really a very slippery slope that can unravel and be a path that soon you cannot recover from.
We have a question on Facebook that's saying, do you think the so-called lying was about Comey saying he didn't tell anyone to leak information? Can he and others legally leak information? And I want to ask you that in the context of this indictment itself, which is unusual, just in the fact that it's so light on details and so brief. It's just 2 pages.
It's extremely sparse, so you really don't know very much what the grand jury, what was presented to them. And grand juries are, inclined. They in fact rejected one of the 3 um, articles of indictment that were brought. But leaking is not necessarily a crime. It can be in a tool that's used judiciously or communicating to the press. I mean, that's a whole different subject. But lying about whether you leaked or not to a congressional inquiry where you're under oath, it's the lying, it's not the leaking.
Okay.
And so, but in this case, I am not aware, I could be wrong, and I'm not privy to all the facts, but it sure doesn't look like, and the other objective prosecutors that weren't forced to bring the case believed that there was no evidence that would substantiate a prosecution for perjury.
What do you think is happening for the people who are working at the Department of Justice? And up to and including Pam Bondi, who is obviously hails from Florida, the Attorney General. She is now getting sort of open solicitations on social media from her boss, commanding her to see that justice is done, essentially, and to punish these named people. I mean, it's specifically in the social media post he made, he mentioned Letitia James, James Comey, and Senator Adam Schiff.
Sometimes it's very direct, and sometimes it's obvious, but it's not so direct. It reminds me of Henry II saying, "Who will rid me of that troublesome priest?" And then, of course, the priest was executed. But it's I lost the thread there. What was the question?
Well, just what it is, what you imagine the experience is like to be working at the Department of
Sure.
Justice at this time.
Thank you for getting me back on track. Marla says, my wife says, that if I ever had an autobiography, the title would be "I Digress." So I'm sorry. It's disheartening. I can imagine, because it's disheartening for so many lawyers that I know and talk about, to see what is the standard profession that we love and that is committed to service, to be like this. So the people there are completely disheartened, and they're leaving in droves, and the Justice Department is being hollowed out from very experienced, high-value people. And in the Eastern District, several people have already resigned, and there'll be more to follow. So that's the impact. From afar, it's disheartening and concerning. It should be concerning to every American citizen, but it's got to be concerning for people that are employed there.
Got just about a minute left. Sally in Springfield. Good morning, Sally. Go ahead.
Good morning. Yes, thank you for this show. This incident of bringing an indictment against Comey is just another incident in the turmoil that's going on in this country, what with the tariffs and the farmers and the bombing of boats in other countries, cutting benefits, holding up the extension of the Obama healthcare subsidies. It's not good. All this fighting and lawsuits, it's just not good for our country. And it's very upsetting to see the leader of our country causing all this strife. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I appreciate your
Sally,
comments.
Can I just suggest something? That it can be extremely daunting if you look at all of the things that are going on. But no single individual or organization has to solve all the problems. And what helps is, if there's something particularly that's near and dear to your heart that you feel strongly about, to pick one or two things, or to stand up. Now, for lawyers, it may be, for example, bar associations looking at whether the license, the requirements for the license, and the oath that every student, our 91.7% of our graduates who just passed the Florida bar.
Congrats.
Sorry, I had to work that in.
No, that's great.
But the oath that they're taking, and I would suggest if anybody who's one of your listeners wants to Google and look up the oath of that lawyers take when they become a licensed member of the Florida bar, that oath, the promises they make, are directly relevant to this important conversation that you've hosted today.
Well, congrats again on your student success Nick Allard, Dean of the Jacksonville University Law School. Thanks so much for coming on
Thank
this
you.
morning.
Anytime.
All right. Up next, it claims twice as many lives as homicide, but is almost never mentioned on the nightly news. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. Well, from teens to seniors, members of the military to people with substance abuse disorder, suicide impacts virtually every demographic. Here to talk about efforts to change that narrative, we're joined by Jasmine Flowers. She is a survivor and a peer recovery specialist. Jasmine, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Christina Caulfield, CEO at LSF Health Systems. Welcome back, Dr. Caulfield.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
And Nick Padlow, CEO at Sophros Recovery. Am I saying Sophros correctly?
You got it.
All right. Nick, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Nick, before the break, I mentioned that suicide is little discussed in the news relative to its frequency. We know it is essentially twice as common as homicide. But reports are sort of covered up almost by design in the news business. And I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, obviously, there's sort of always been copycat concerns. I'm curious what you feel about whether that is helpful or harmful when it comes to efforts to combat suicide.
It's certainly harmful. All the studies that we have seen show that talking about suicide doesn't increase the risk of someone committing suicide. In fact, it does the opposite, right? So it normalizes it, and it allows us to say, this is something we can talk about, and it's okay if I'm feeling this way, but I need to talk about it, because without getting something treated, without getting it out into the open, it tends to fester and get worse. These things are progressive, right? Most mental health conditions are progressive if left untreated. And so when we don't talk about it, what we do is we allow someone to spiral down into the silence. And that's the exact opposite of what we want.
And I guess there's this sense that normalizing it is something that could lead to other people thinking about it, perhaps that wouldn't be thinking about it. But you don't think that that's the case.
And I think the differentiation is we're not normalizing suicide. We're normalizing talking about suicidal ideation. So what we're doing is we're giving people the permission to say, hey, I'm not feeling okay today. In fact, I'm feeling really not okay, to the point where I don't know if life is worth living anymore. And when we allow people to say that, we can start to ask questions. We can start to have dialogue. And even the process of talking about that a little earlier is cathartic and healing. And so we start to get into a place where we're in a healing space, as opposed to this, we always say in the rooms in addiction, we always say our secrets keep us sick. It's the same thing with mental health. When we don't talk about it, it gets worse, and we get more likely to take that next step as opposed to less likely.
Dr. Caulfield, I just want to put some numbers to what we're talking about, because relative to homicide, which we mentioned, in 2023, there were 148 homicides in Duval County and 176 adults who died by suicide. Obviously, that doesn't include a great many more that attempted suicide and did not end up dying by suicide. What is it, do you think, are we making any progress in terms of communicating just the risk level that exists? Because we do spend a lot of time talking about homicide.
We do. And you're right. And that's why at LSF Health Systems, we said we've got to do more because our statistics here in Jacksonville are not good. We have a higher rate of completed suicides than the state, as well as a higher rate than the nation. So we said, you know what, we've got to do more. And so that is why we initiated the Zero Suicide Jax program because we feel very strongly, as Nick has shared, that more people need to understand the gravity of this situation, and they need to understand also that individually they can help in this raising of awareness and knowing the signs and symptoms and being able to talk to somebody that they feel might be struggling, as well as organizations, businesses in the community. Because oftentimes people that are thinking about taking their own lives aren't seeing a therapist. And so you, as their colleague at work, or their coach, or their teacher, or their church fellow member, might be the first one to notice that they are struggling and not themselves. And so we need to equip people and organizations on how to best help people that are struggling with this very serious issue.
And this Zero Suicide initiative focuses a lot on training gatekeepers. It's sort of the people that you're talking about, people who are perhaps, involved in someone's life or even a little bit more peripheral to their life and may have spotted changes. I wonder, obviously equipping people to feel like they can do something and intervene when appropriate, it empowers them to do that. But is it also risky to just sort of ask people who may not have proper training to sort of insert themselves in what could be a very sort of dicey emotional and psychological set of circumstances?
Right. And so that is why we have a toolkit. If you go to our website, zerosuicidejax.org, there are toolkits, there are tons of resources for training to help individuals ask that difficult question. I'm really worried about you. You don't seem to be yourself. Are you thinking of taking your own life? And it equips them to then take the steps necessary to ensure that that individual that they've just asked that question to has the resources necessary to get themselves some help. And so that's why we're asking individuals and organizations to take the pledge at zerosuicidejax.org because they will have all these resources necessary and the training so that they can make a difference. They too can be a part of reducing the risk of suicide in Jacksonville.
Jasmine, you are currently an advocate and a peer recovery specialist. You also teach trauma-informed yoga, and you are very immersed in the community of recovery.
Yes.
And you also have had your own personal experiences as a survivor. First of all, are you comfortable talking about some of that?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
In particular, the issue of very young people
Mhm.
encountering this problem and also coping methods for it. You first were encountering this when you were just very young. Is that
Mhm.
right? Can you tell us
Yes.
a little bit about what was happening then?
As a child, I grew up in violence and chaos, and so I had a very traumatic experience happen to me around 8 years old. And at the time, without knowing anything about therapy and or resources, and my mom having no knowledge of anything like that, I was just kind of seeking an escape route, and I didn't know, all these big feelings as a child that I'm having. There are words to them, and there are ways to feel better. People can help you and navigate things. So I was feeling incredibly isolated and alone, and I didn't have any way to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing and this is why. I was afraid. I lived in a space of fear, and nobody told me that what's happening to you and what you're experiencing is not normal. And even then, I think teachers back then were afraid to broach the subjects of, like, why is this student now suddenly not doing well in class? Why is this student having these big emotions and no explanation? They just kind of, would send me to a calm corner, or, send me to the the guidance counselor, and we'd have a brief conversation. But again, without rapport, I didn't feel safe enough to disclose, hey, this is what I'm feeling and experiencing. And I'm sure I got the notion from something I saw on TV of, like, oh, I could just, kill myself, or, take my own life. And as a child, I had this imagination of, like, I'll get a new one, so
Yeah, and you were very young, just 9 at the time.
yes, I was 9.
And I think that a lot of people are shocked when they learn that people that young are even thinking about such
Right.
things, because it seems like such the enormity of it. But it was an issue that persisted throughout your teens as well.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm guessing the fact that went sort of untreated or undiagnosed contributed to the fact that it continued.
Right. There was a series of events, so on and so forth, that also were traumatic for me as a young girl that just kind of kept going on. And then around 14, I had a lot of body dysmorphia, and again, just drenched in fear and feeling isolated and feeling really, really misunderstood. And so, again, I remember thinking, like, there has to be a way out of this feeling. And I discovered boys and alcohol. And I was like, well, if I don't successfully, complete my death by suicide, then I will now just, fully overindulge in these things that are also unhealthy for me because they were another form of escape. And so I navigated just always trying to find ways to escape. And I think that that's one of the biggest common feelings for people when they're feeling super overwhelmed or afraid or isolated is they want to escape the feeling.
Okay. If you're just joining us, we are talking about suicide prevention. We're talking with some people who have survived and continue to advocate in the community, and also a new training program for people who want to get involved. And to help, if you've got comments or questions, you can call us at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got a call from Mark on the South Side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I appreciate the discussion, and I'm just kind of curious, at what point do you, as maybe a loved one or the outsider, when do you recognize that you might have to, Baker Act somebody, physically remove them from an environment and physically take them to a treatment center versus just having that open discussion and trying to, counsel them, let them vent, that kind of a thing? How do you recognize that, and how do you approach that?
That's a very important distinction, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you have thoughts on that, Nick? I mean, do you have any any advice to offer?
Yeah, so the first thing is if someone is indicating that they are having some suicidal ideations, that they're thinking about it, it's probably still too early, potentially. But what that does is it cues us up to ask follow-on questions. And those are the questions we often hear about in terms of means and intent. Have you thought about how you would do it? Do you have the ability? And the other thing we want to look at is protective factors. What are the things that are keeping you from doing it? Well, my religious beliefs, I want to be here for my kids. And so there's no clear-cut answer of if these questions are yes, then I call for a Baker Act. But what we can do is we can say, okay, let me kind of weigh this evidence and say, okay, they're having suicidal ideation and they've thought about it. They know exactly how they're going to do it. Let me make a call to somebody to see what's going on. And there are a lot of professionals that can kind of help guide that too. I know like at Sophros, for example, if someone calls us, one of our clinicians can talk to them, right? And so you can get additional resources to make that call. But the thing I would say is, we don't want to overdo it because it can be traumatic, right? The whole process of a Baker Act can be traumatic. And we also need to err on the side of caution because this is someone's life, right? So I would rather you make that call a minute too early than a day too late, right? We don't want to make it or even a day too early than a minute too late, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to make it weeks too early when it's like, hey, I have thought about, taking my life by suicide. Okay, let me call and have the police come here and take you to a treatment center. No, okay, probably not there. But if someone starts to indicate, okay, I'm spiraling down, we're dipping deeper into substances, okay, now we need to make that call, even if it's hard to make.
So you deal very often with military members, former military members, and the community of people that have a different set of challenges sometimes altogether when it comes to suicide or suicidal ideation. But before we talk about that, in terms of the conversation you're talking about having with someone, I mean, obviously it takes an enormous amount of courage and investment for someone to begin that conversation. But what is it that makes someone receptive to hearing those? Because I would feel that, perhaps somebody that is experiencing that would be really reluctant to open up about it, talk about it, particularly if it's a coworker or a colleague or somebody they know from church, whether they would just suddenly say, well, yes, I'm experiencing all of these, terrible thoughts.
So the first thing is that the ability to have these conversations starts way before we have them. So what we want to do in our lives is practice having real conversations with our loved ones. Practice asking difficult questions. Practice talking about emotions and feelings. Normalize that, right? Start those conversations early. Start them now with your family. Start having difficult conversations and asking hard questions about feelings and emotions and being more open and vulnerable. Then when you ask that question, it doesn't seem like such a leap. Hey, we've never talked about anything other than the Jaguars. And now I'm going to ask you if you're taking your own life. Like, you've never demonstrated care for me before. Why would I share with you now? And so the first thing is, I would say we start it early. The other thing that I would say is we want to focus on asking questions rather than giving advice. Doesn't mean we never give advice. We can. There will be a time and place perhaps. But there's a concept called a motivational interviewing, where what you're doing is you're asking a series of questions. And when you feel like you're about to give advice, you ask another question, right? So instead of saying, hey, or have you had any thoughts of dying by suicide? Yeah, I've thought about it. Well, what you need to do is you need to go to treatment. You need to call a therapist. Ask the question, have you ever thought about talking to a therapist? Has that ever been something that's crossed your mind? Do you think that would be helpful? Why don't you think it would be helpful? And then every time you feel like giving a statement and giving advice, ask another question.
Hmm.
And then when you hear something that's helpful, when they say something that's helpful, now you echo it back. And you start to guide that into a more kind of advice flow of conversation.
For instance, if they say that their family is an important source of support, sort of echo that back to them.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that your family is an important source of support. Have you thought about reaching out to them this week?
Hmm.
Well, no, but maybe I could. Okay. Could you do that today? And so we just keep asking questions and getting to the point where we're kind of driving toward the action we want.
Jasmine, does it sound like those kind of conversations would have been helpful to you at age 9, at age 14, or back in 2025, which I think was kind of the most recent and perhaps most serious incident that you had? Would those have been conversations that would have reached you at those various ages? And if not, what might have been more helpful?
Yeah. Well, not in 2025. I was going to be 25, so this was about 10 years ago.
I'm sorry, 2015.
No worries. I
Yeah.
was like, absolutely. Just like I mentioned rapport, having no rapport, only talking about, very surface level things with somebody would not have made me comfortable enough to then have that deep conversation of how I'm feeling. And I think creating safety in any dynamic within any relationship, there is a level of intimacy there that allows for hard conversations and uncomfortable things to be said and shared. And I think that it's not a taboo subject if more people were to say, even if you're not having the, ideations immediately, but you're feeling exhausted every day, your emotions always feel out of control, you are having all of these feelings that are overwhelming you, it can easily on a random Sunday become a feeling of, I'm having suicidal ideation. So if you're already able to articulate and have conversations saying, I'm feeling tired literally every other day of my life, I'm emotionally distressed, I'm having this, I'm suffering here, I'm suffering there, then it allows for somebody to say, you've repeatedly said over and over that you're tired. How can we help you solve this feeling, this heaviness, before it gets to the point of, I see no escape route to what I'm feeling? Because I think that for me, I was in a really abusive relationship and I moved across the country to be away from him because I was afraid of him. And I remember feeling so isolated and so alone and so ashamed that I was in this relationship. How could I have grown up seeing this and still make these kind of mistakes or, poor decisions as I had seen them as? And I really, really didn't value myself or my own life. And so carrying that and not sharing it with anybody, again, created this notion of, it's just me. I'm the only person who makes continual mistakes. I'm the only person who, is full of shame and guilt and remorse, when no, that's impossible. That is a human experience. And if more people were to say, I also have felt shame, guilt, remorse, I've made mistakes, I've suffered in this kind of way, then it creates this, oh, I'm not alone, which is one of the biggest things that when I hear people say, because I ask this question every single day at Sofros, when I hear people say, well, yes, I am having suicidal ideations, but I don't have a plan, then you don't have to assess protective factors. But if they're like, yes, actually, I have a plan, I actually have a weapon at home, then we have to go through a whole route of assessing. But I think that at the end of the day, when you can have that conversation and say to somebody, okay, I too have felt this way, it creates this all of a sudden the floodgates open to this free feeling of, wow, I'm not alone in this.
Dr. Caulfield, I was surprised recently on a doctor visit where the intake nurse who kind of does your blood pressure and your pulse oximeter, whatever, was asking all of these questions. Have you felt, depressed? Have you felt worthless. I kind of all of these questions that might address somebody who might be having suicidal ideation is very routine, I guess now, which I think is an interesting form of progress on this conversation. But she's a clinician. She has a place to take that information. If people are asking these questions, and I know you say that there's this training that's available, but do they have to sort of be in a place where they're able and willing to take on an emotional chore or an emotional and psychological burden of sorts, to be willing to sort of stay in the game, to be willing to walk with that person if they need additional help?
Right. Well, I tend to look at it as helping that individual connect to the resources they need. So we don't have to become therapists or feel like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to be in this person's life every single day and check in and so on. Although connection is very important. But the whole point of Zero Suicide Jax initiative is helping people know what questions to ask and then know what resources are in the community to connect that individual. For example, one resource is 988. That is the emergency number, just like 911 is if you have a physical illness and a physical emergency. 988 is for anyone struggling with an emotional issue, anyone struggling with thoughts of taking their own life. So simply by saying, I'm with you, I hear what you're saying. Did you know that a simple 3-number call, 988, will connect you to a therapist that will help guide you through this very rough time? I'm here for you. I care for you. And why don't we make the call together? So as an individual, you don't have to have all the answers clinically, but just by caring, asking the question, getting the information, and then the connection to community resources. That is really key.
Nick, your thoughts?
One of the best comparisons that I've heard between these conversations about suicide and the initiatives that LSF is doing with Zero Suicide is similar to CPR. When we do CPR training, when we think about CPR, we think about someone jumping in and saving a life. And that does happen with CPR. But the biggest impact from all of the CPR training that's been done in the United States is that people recognize the signs and symptoms of a heart attack earlier and they call 911 faster. That's how CPR saves lives. It does save lives practically in the same way that you might be able to talk to someone and they don't want to, any longer take their life by suicide. And the biggest impact that this stuff is going to have is going to be connecting people to resources earlier so that professionals can do intervention in just the same way that we do with CPR.
That is so interesting. We are almost out of time, but I do want to ask you, in terms of reaching young people, and we know there's so many more challenges, AI, chatbots and social media. Do you have any specific advice for people who are either teachers or parents?
I think to what Nicholas was saying and Dr. Caulfield, it's incredibly important to already have conversations. Like I have 2 wonderful daughters and they're 9 and 7. So they're still really like at an age where most of things are pretty innocent and fun and easy breezy, but they also have big feelings and emotions. And I'm constantly having emotional conversations with them so that I create this feeling of safety and this knowing that like you can have the ability to talk to me about certain things.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, this is Jesse Cook, and I'm excited to be returning to Jacksonville on January 23rd, 2026 at the WJCT Soundstage. Join me for an unforgettable night of music, rhythm, and connection.
Go to wjct.org/events.
On the next Fresh Air, Grammy-winning music producer Mark Ronson talks about his new memoir, Night People. It's a love letter to late-night New York City in the 90s, recounting how his early days as a DJ shaped him as a producer behind hits for Amy Winehouse, Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga, and more. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
The United Healthcare CEO's murder, a shooting at a Texas ICE facility, the Charlie Kirk assassination. Is left-wing political violence on the rise in America?
Some of the arguments in a generic sense we're seeing on the right, which is the system can't change, it's all fixed, we're starting to see on the left. I worry it's going to worsen the cycle of polarization. You know, they killed one of ours, the only thing they understand is that we kill one of theirs.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Caring for a family member who's aging or disabled can take a huge toll on caregivers, and the burden just got heavier with President Trump's cuts to Medicaid, the single largest source of money for long-term care of disabled and elderly people. What cuts to federal benefits mean for caregivers who rely on them. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, David Luckin is a known quantity here in Northeast Florida in the arts and culture landscape, even recognized last year with the 2024 Art Innovator Award by the Cultural Council of Greater Jax. Hey, David.
Hi, Ann.
So in addition to that, you are also station manager, music director, host of the Electro Lounge. But for us here selfishly at First Coast Connect, you are the executive producer of this show, and you have been for a long time. That's changing today.
It sure is. I'm going to ease myself out of the news business after 42 years, and I'm just going to concentrate on programming music and events as I start to take some of my time back, I think.
Yeah, well, you are
It's been
here
a long run.
round the clock. And as you say, you have been in the news business for 42 years. For people who are lucky enough to be able to watch our live stream, we've got some pictures of you along your journey. You started working in news at like 17?
No, 1983 at Channel 17.
At Channel 17,
No.
but you were an intern there.
I was a paid weekend shooter on the weekends with a Volkswagen van.
What got you into
I went to
photojournalism?
University of Florida.
Okay.
So that was, I was offered an internship at Philadelphia, at WCAU, or one at WJKS. And in Philly, they said, it's a union shop. You won't really do anything here. And JKS said, we'll put a camera on your shoulder and you can start shooting tomorrow. So I took the paid internship at Channel 17 in 1983, and then that turned into a full-time job.
And we should say, even before you started carrying a camera around, you've been like a lifelong news junkie.
Oh, I started my first little newspaper in 6th grade, a little mimeograph ditto. So yeah, I've always been crazy about news and music. So I've always tried to put news in my music and try to add music to my news in whatever job I've had.
Yeah, and you've made music a big part of this program. First Coast Connect was really your brainchild. I want to ask you about what the idea was behind it and how you connected with the first and longtime host, Melissa Ross. But first, let's take a listen to a little message that she had for you.
Okay.
Have we got that, Sod?
David Luckin changed my life. He was the one who encouraged me to apply for a talk show role at WJCT back in 2009. He was the one who, more than any other person, helped me make First Coast Connect successful when we first went on the air, because there was no staff, there was no budget, there was no promotion, there was no nothing. And it was really, honestly, just David there with me every single day. I'm so glad he's going to be enjoying a well-earned partial retirement soon. Nobody has earned it more. Love you, David.
Love you too, Melissa. And there was Luis there, our intern, who actually directed the show, and I produced it, and Melissa wrote the whole thing. So just so everyone knows, Ann and Stacy and Melissa and Heather and Bella, they do all the real work. I just run around and make sure everything's going well.
Well, you're the master of ceremonies, and you also are the idea man. You know, you're always following the news. You're always
Right.
coming with ideas about things for us to cover. So what was the idea, though, behind First Coast Connect?
We were talking way back that we needed our own local call-in show,
Mhm.
and I was a huge fan of Imus in the morning. So I wrote a 10-page proposal, and we do, Thinking Green on Tuesdays and the God Squad on Thursdays and all this stuff. And Michael Boylan, the president, said, let's do it. And then I called Melissa. I'd seen her on First Coast News. I never met her. I met her at 3 Layers and said, why don't you apply? I think you're really good. And she applied, and a few months later, we started the show with Luis on the board and me and Melissa. So I thank all those folks. I've been lucky to work with really talented people.
Yeah.
People like you, which has been a great way at the end of my news career to be able to work with you has been a pleasure.
Well, Melissa obviously was 11 years in this role and is a beloved voice and well recognized, even though she's moved on now to other greener fields. But another person that you worked with was the multi-hyphenate talent, Al Letson.
Yeah.
Was in this chair for a number of months in the interim after
Yep.
Melissa left, and he also had a little message for you.
What to say about David Luckin? Number one, he is probably the most genuinely kind person that I've ever met in my life. Number two, he has a ridiculous love for the oldies and good music and movies and all of that. And then number three, he has always, 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 from day one, and I mean, we're going back at least 15 years now, has always treated me like I am his little brother. And I cannot put into words how much his support has meant to me over the years. He is he's a gem. He's the best of Jacksonville. He's the best of humanity. But um, I'll take it down a notch and say he's definitely the best of Jacksonville, and I love him. David, congratulations, man. I love you, dude.
Okay. Al Letson, coming from him, I won't say anything because Al's the best. I listen to Reveal every Saturday, and I often text him and say, another great show.
Yeah.
Boy, that means a lot to me. Thank you so much, Al.
Yeah.
What a good
Well,
person.
David, I mean, we want to thank you for all you've done for creating this program, but also all that you will continue to do for WJCT. Obviously, you're going to continue to be here,
Oh, yeah.
part of the station forever and ever. Anything that you want to say?
No, I would just say that it's been a real pleasure to be in the news business this long, to have met people I've met and to tell other people's stories and people who've invited me into their homes with the Electoral Lounge. So basically, I feel really lucky that I picked the right career. I always wanted to do it from when I was a kid. So it all worked out, and I'll still be around. I'll still suggest leads to you.
Yeah. Well, we will look forward to seeing you. We're going to miss you on the program. David Luckin, it's his last show as executive producer of First Coast Connect. David, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back again tomorrow. You've been listening to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. The Florida Forum Speaker Series benefiting Wolfson Children's Hospital presents The Eyes of the World from D-Day to VE Day, written and narrated by Jacksonville native John Monsky. Tuesday, September 30th at the Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets at thefloridaforum.com.
This is WJCT News